It's Stan Veit's History of the Personal Computer. From Altair to IBM, A History of the PC Revolution. By Stan Veit, Editor-in-Chief Emeritus, Computer Shopper. Copyright 1993 and 2025 by Stan Veit and A-Books Creativity Incorporated. Read by Randy Kindig and David Greelish. Chapter 12, Commodore, From PET to Amiga. The story of Commodore Business Machines must be divided into two distinct parts, the Tramiel era and the post-Tramiel era. It was Jack Tramiel who created Commodore and made it the leader in home computers, and it was his exit that changed the company culture and made it into what it has become today, a bad company with a great product. To understand Jack Tramiel, you had to remember where he came from and the road he traveled to get to the start of the personal computer revolution. A Jewish refugee who survived 6 years in Hitler's death camps, Jack found his way across the Atlantic where he joined the U.S. Army. The Army taught him how to repair typewriters and stationed him in New York City. When he finished his military duty, Jack stayed in New York and opened a typewriter repair store in the Bronx. This grew into a business machine company selling mechanical adding machines and repairing typewriters.
In 1955, Jack saw opportunities in Canada and moved the company across the border, where it continued to expand. And in 1962, Commodore went public. In 1965, the rags to riches story took a detour, and Commodore found itself in financial trouble because of the dealings of a former chairman whose company failed. As usual, Jack survived the crisis, but the price he paid was loss of control of his company. This was to come back and haunt him later. He made a deal with Irving Gold, a Canadian financier, giving up his stock in Commodore in exchange for cash, with the provision that some stock would be returned if his rescue operation succeeded. Jack took $3 million of the company and bought MOS Technology, a semiconductor manufacturer in Pennsylvania. He knew that the future of all electronic machines was dependent on a supply of chips. And if he had to buy from competitors like Texas Instruments, he could not stay in business. With characteristic fervor, Jack pushed Commodore toward recovery, and the company gave him back 8% of the stock.
Among other chips, MOS Technology made the 6502 microprocessor, a near clone of Motorola's M6800, but with a completely different instruction set. In an effort to get the 6502 adopted by computer engineers, MOS distributed them at very low prices. For this reason, Steve Wozniak designed the Apple computer using a 6502 chip, a decision that was to make this one of the most popular 8-bit CPUs. Two other companies were later licensed to make the chip, to meet the demand from Apple, Atari, Ohio Scientific, and others. Within MOS Technology, Chuck Peddle, the chip's designer, built a single-board computer called the KIM-1. The KIM contained many advanced features and allowed many users to gain a low-cost introduction to microcomputing. However, after acquiring MOS Technology, Jack gave Peddle 6 months to design and build a prototype of a real personal computer. The Commodore team put together the first self-contained personal computer, which they called the Personal Electronic Transactor, or PET. The PET was announced in 1976 and first shown at the Consumer Electronics Show in June of 1977. It came with either a 4K or 8K memory and a built-in green video monitor. The keyboard was built like a Commodore calculator instead of a typewriter keyboard. Programs and data were saved and loaded from a built-in cassette recorder. The price for all this started at a mere $795, a price decision that Jack was later to regret. However, there would be no PETs available to dealers or the public for 6 months. Commodore announced that if you wanted to order one, you had to pay the full price now and wait for delivery sometime in the future.
It was even harder to become a dealer. Dealers had to have a store and a service facility and were also required to post at least $2,500 with their applications, and there was no promise when they would get delivery. Moreover, Commodore played favorites and channeled product to dealers who were on the favored list. In spite of this, the public demand for PETs was huge. When Jack realized that he had a real winner, he doubled the price and introduced the PET into the United Kingdom and Europe. It was an incredible success, and within a short time, Commodore had rounded up 80% of the market overseas. Also on this page, they show a picture of one of those early Commodore PETs.
Meanwhile, back in the United States, the company was gaining a terrible reputation for lack of support of both users and dealers. As a dealer, I would order 20 PETs to cover orders. They would ship perhaps 10, and of those, only 6 would work. We got to be more expert in the repair of PETs than of any other computers because we had so much more experience. We never sold a PET that had not been burned, quote unquote, in at least a week. However, the machine did evolve, and the calculator keyboard was replaced by a almost standard QWERTY model, which lacked an alpha period. You had to use a decimal point. That was typical of Commodore. The printer interface was non-standard, so you had to buy your printer from Commodore. The cassette interface was different. Even the parallel port was strange. Later, the cassette was eliminated, and a floppy disk drive was sold as a necessary option. The 2040 disk drive had 2 disk drives, which allowed the user to work with 2 disks, and Commodore's engineers found a method of storing 170K bytes on a drive, or about 50 pages of text. At that time, Apple's drives held 150K, and Atari's only 90K. The operating system was built into firmware on the 2040 disk drive rather than being a separate software program. This made it easy to use, but kept Commodore locked into obsolete operating systems for long periods.
The overseas success led to the development of a vastly enhanced computer called the CBM 8032. This business computer had a green monitor, a full business keyboard, and 32K of memory. Larger disk drives were also made available for business use. There was little advertising, almost no software development, except for programs adopted from European versions, and even fewer dealers. Most people in the United States almost counted Commodore out of business. One place that Commodore placed most of its United States production was in education. It quickly dominated the educational market by giving a free computer for every 2 that a school bought. This bargain made it harder for the much more expensive Apples and Radio Shack TRS-80s to get into the schools, although the teachers much preferred them. Selling the schools was one thing, but keeping them running was another. Many of the Commodore PETs ended up in closets because of lack of repair parts. However, as a result of its overseas operations and the MOS Technology chip business, Commodore had grown into a prosperous company and was actually the 3rd largest personal computer company after Apple and Radio Shack.
In 1978, MOS Technology developed a chip that allowed a computer to use a color monitor or color TV instead of the monochrome display. It was called the Video Interface Chip, or VIC, and it could only display 22 columns in color. The VIC chip had not sold well because of the price and availability of color monitors or TVs. Now, 2 years later, Apple and Atari had color computers, and Commodore had none. Chuck Peddle was lobbying for the development of color PET and CBM computers. Then, at a meeting called in England to discuss the future of Commodore's products, Jack Tramiel suddenly announced that he wanted to market a color computer right away, and he wanted to retail it for $300. This was an unheard of price, but Jack justified it by saying, "The Japanese are coming, so we will be the Japanese. We have to compete with ourselves," Tramiel told his people. "We have to be like the Japanese. We constantly have to come up with something new, something better. We have to believe that we are the competition. If we do this, then no one could get ahead of us."
Tramiel knew that the way to beat the Japanese at their own game was to produce a product at a price they could not compete with. The Japanese tactic was to watch carefully while an electronic device was introduced, first at a high price and later at a lower price as the market grew. Once the ground was broken by others and the quantities being sold were sufficient to support mass production, A Japanese company could then enter the market with an excellent product at much lower price. Tramiel's strategy was to introduce a new product at the lowest price possible right from the start. He could then capture the market before anyone else could get in and compete. Once the competition matched his low price, he could cut prices even lower since he would have already achieved large-scale mass production.
The little color computer evolved in secret at MOS Technology, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. It was not a self-contained unit such as the PET. The entire machine was housed in the keyboard case, and its memory capacity was only 5K of RAM. There was a slot for a software cartridge, which would contain a program recorded in read-only memory, ROM, so it did not use any of the 5K main memory. However, the computer could also be programmed with a small version of BASIC that was also in ROM, and the program could be saved on a dataset recorder. The keyboard was much more standard than the PET model, and the missing period was found. The number keys, 0 through 9, served double functions. When pressed at the same time as a control key, they changed the color of the display. There were 8 colors available: white, black, red, cyan, light blue, purple, green, navy blue, and yellow.
The color computer could also display the PET graphics set and even a reverse set of graphics characters. The video screen was only 22 characters wide, but the characters were nice and large. Naturally, there was no CRT with the little computer, but by then most users had a color set at home, and a video switch was supplied to connect into the antenna terminals. The code name of the small computer was a Vixen, but there was much discussion on a final name before settling on VIC-20. Introduced in January 1981 at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show, or CES, in Las Vegas, the VIC-20 was a big success. The press very favorably compared it to the new TI-99-4 and the Atari 400 computers. However, it was not until the spring CES in Chicago that the final version with FCC approval was available.
The VIC-20 introduced thousands of people to computers because it was inexpensive and was sold in the mass market stores. It also had a full line of peripherals. Many of the online services, such as Genie and CompuServe, owe their growth to the low-cost VIC modem. This unity allowed large numbers of people to get online who might have never tried telecommunications. The price and capability of the VIC-20 was a factor that destroyed the market for video games, such as the Atari 2600. The other very important thing about the VIC-20 was that its expansion gave birth to the most popular computer ever built, the Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 had 16 colors in place of the 8 on the VIC-20. It had a 40-column screen rather than 22. It had a music synthesizer chip, SID chip, and easy-to-use graphics called sprites, and it could use all of the VIC-20 peripherals. Most of all, it had 64K of RAM at a time when Apple had a maximum of 48K. It went on sale to computer store dealers for $595, and a few months later was moved to Kmart for $400.
The home computer price war really started between Texas Instruments and Commodore in the summer of 1982, with Texas Instruments issuing a $100 rebate on the TI-99-4A, bringing the price down to $200. Commodore dropped the VIC-20 price to dealers by $40 and let them sell it for any price they wanted. In September 1982, the Commodore 64 hit the computer stores at $595, and then Atari joined the fray with a $55 rebate on the Atari 400 and dropped the price on the Atari 800 to under $500. Commodore moved the C64 from the computer stores to mass merchants such as Kmart for $400. And then there are a couple of really nice pictures here in the book. One shows some Commodore machines, particularly some PET machines, and it looks like maybe a VIC-20 or a Commodore 64 in the back. It says, when this brochure was introduced in 1983, Commodore was billing their offerings as the most complete microcomputer line. There were 9 different models of computers listed, 5 printers, and 6 configurations of storage devices, from a single floppy disk up to a 7.5 megabyte hard disk. 2 models of modems and the dataset, an external data cassette recorder, were also detailed.
The dealers roared with pain at seeing one of their most profitable incomes going out the door. To a computer store, the sale of a C64 was only the start on a much more expensive computer system. They made more money on the peripherals and software than on the computer. The VIC-20 price was dropped to less than $130, and merchants started selling them below cost whenever a complete system was purchased. In February 1983, Texas Instruments again cut the dealer's price of the TI-99 4A by $48, making the retail price $150. Commodore responded by cutting the prices on all peripherals and reducing the price of the VIC-20 to below $100. Then Commodore came up with a massive trade-in offer. They would give a $100 trade-in on any video game or computer against the purchase of a C64. Out came all the old Atari 2600s and televisions, VIC-20s, Sinclairs, and Timexes. People bought Timex computers on sale for $50 and turned them in on C64s for $100. The retail price with a trade-in was $300.
Atari had just introduced its new 1200 XL and found they had to rebate $100 right from the start. However, at the spring CES, Commodore really lowered the boom. They slashed the C64 dealer's price to between $200 and $250 and cut the price on all their software, including new releases, by 50%. The blood was flowing all over the home computer industry, but at Texas Instruments, it was the worst. Commodore's costs were so low that even at the depressed prices, they actually made money on their computers. However, Texas Instruments was losing $100 million in a quarter, and things were not getting better. Texas Instruments president resigned, and the company quit the home computer business after taking enormous losses. There were other fallouts of the price wars, and Atari represented one of the worst to its parent company, Warner Communications. This would have an unforeseen effect on Commodore.
During the summer of 1983, Commodore announced that it had become the first personal computer company to hit $1 billion in sales. Then, upon this announcement, came the totally unexpected resignation of Jack Tramiel. The industry was shocked. There had been little indication that Jack was that unhappy with conditions at Commodore. The computer press was full of rumors about the cause. It was said that Jack wanted his sons to come into the business in top executive positions, and that Irving Gould objected. It was claimed that Gould wanted to make Marshall Smith president, and that Smith declined as long as Jack was in the company. The actual reasons have never been revealed, but Jack and his wife left for a tour around the world, and upon his return, he formed a company with his sons. Shortly thereafter, they bought Atari from Warner Communications.
Commodore has had a succession of CEOs and executives and is said to have a revolving door in its executive suite. The C64 in various versions and the upgraded Commodore 128 have lasted for more than 10 years. Their numbers alone make them the most popular computer ever built. Commodore went on to feature the Amiga, a 16-bit machine developed by the Lorraine Amiga Company.
So the thing that stands out immediately is the blood was flowing all over the home computer industry.
Yeah, that was quite a time. It was quite a bloodbath.
Yeah, and also the gaming crash happened in 1983 too. The video game crash, right? I think happened in 1983. So in television, Atari 2600, all those, their whole market collapsed pretty much.
Yeah.
Hey, offhand, Randy, do you know now again, this book was published in 93. So the part here where what does it say? Where like Stan Veit didn't know a lot of the rumors about the cost. Was that true what he said here? Do you know later books did it
I
reveal?
don't know. And you know, I really hadn't heard that story. I did get a chance to interview Leonard Tramiel once, but we didn't talk about that. He didn't really want to talk about
Those
um,
days?
those days too much about the 8-bit. and going into Atari, he just wanted to talk about the ST line. So I didn't get much out of him there. So I honestly don't know.
Okay, we got to make sure to put that interview in the show notes. One thing that stood out to me is, of course, my very first computer um, was a not a course to the audience. You mean they don't know this, I guess, but was a Commodore 64. So anyway, I owned a Commodore 64, so I know BASIC was built into it because you turn it on and it comes up in BASIC. So it was in ROM. I never owned a disk drive. All I ever had was the computer, and then I've told the story many times. I'd have to leave it on for days at a time. Yeah, I'd fool around in BASIC and just leave it on, right? I couldn't turn it off.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
ultimately, I got my Apple Lisa. It was kind of my first fully, full-on computer with a hard drive and disk drive. But I guess I kind of knew, but didn't really know about the ROM being built into the disk drive.
Yes.
But I kind of know
There's
it,
an
like,
intelligent disk drive.
yeah,
Atari went the same way. They had intelligent disk drive, so they actually had a variant of the 6502 built into the drives.
right, right. And I,
So
I know I've heard that before, but I guess I'd forgotten about it. Or that's very interesting, huh? Because like, Steve Wozniak, and rightly so, gets a lot of credit for how miniaturized he made the Apple II disk drive,
yeah,
but it wasn't like that, right? I don't think.
his work was really on the controller and making that really
Miniaturized, yeah.
miniaturized, efficient, as few chips as possible, that sort of thing, which was tend to do. But yeah,
Hmm.
Atari and Commodore went the opposite way and made these huge drives, intelligent drives.
Well, I mean, in fairness, it was what, double the size, I guess, but not too giant, really. And that's quite an innovation, really, the way they designed that when you think about it. I
Well,
think
it had the
so.
controller built in, so you didn't have to have it like a separate controller unit, right?
Yeah.
It had everything built into it, is ready to just plug in and use.
So, yeah, very interesting chapter. And so, a couple of things that'll be in the show notes is I used to do a podcast called The History of Personal Computing, and we did an episode about the PET. And so there'll be a link there if anyone's interested in listening to that. I also, if you'll click on these couple of links here, how about we'll discuss the first one, then you discuss the second one. But just took the time to do a quick search on eBay. It's November 19th, 2025, but if you do a search for Commodore PET in quotes, so it finds specifically those, or you get a lot of Commodore, but there's currently 36 PETs. And the most expensive one right now is a 2001 8, which that should be, I guess, the original one. They want $3,500 for it. And then going down the line, there's another 2001-8, which I guess is the original, and there would have been a 2001-4 and $3,000, another one $3,000, and then you get to an 8032 with a without the cassette, the full keyboard, numeric. They want 1,800. So, boy, these things.
Yeah, they're not cheap. They
Yeah.
are
See, what's the
not
cheapest
cheap,
one is in Canada here for $500. I'm going to bet you maybe it doesn't work. Well, here's one
probably.
for 285. They want $500 shipping. That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's crazy. Does this
You
one work?
better be willing to pick it up if you're going to buy one from somebody because shipping costs is going to kill you.
Yeah.
Those
So
things
this
are
one
heavy.
for about 285 US. And then they want $500 shipping, and it doesn't work. So that's typical,
Yeah,
probably, I guess.
yeah. That's something I've never owned as a Commodore PET. It's not one of in my collection. I guess they're so huge that I just never
Mhm.
felt like I'd have room for it.
Early on, when I started collecting, so that was still I was in the Army in El Paso, Texas. So we're talking like 94-ish, I think. But I had one, original one, and it worked, and it was all cool, and I had that, for a long time, and I sold it ultimately, or it stopped working. Most of the time I hung on to the ones I collected unless they broke. And then, I was never one, I couldn't really get in there with the recapping thing and all that. But then also if you do the search on the next one for VIC-20s, and there's 298 of them
Yeah,
on
the
eBay.
VIC-20s are not hard to get, and boxed VIC-20s are very prevalent as well. For some reason, people tended to keep the boxes with them. I know I've got a boxed one, and I've had other boxed ones come through my collection at various times. But
But I wanted to point out one specifically. This is the second most expensive one up there right now. But I thought you would really be interested in this one. It's an ultra rare vintage Commodore VIC-20 computer system. And at $1,876, Randy, I want to make sure you saw this because shipping at
but
$67 is pretty reasonable.
yeah, they force you to pay shipping as well, even after you've paid $1,876 for the
What's so ultra rare
machine.
about it? They don't even say. I guess it's supposed to be
Eh,
new. It's
I,
in plastic,
just because it's in box and maybe hadn't been used much, I don't know.
and the
People
box
ask
is really
crazy
messed up
prices for
looking.
stuff. Honestly, in my experience, you can buy a boxed VIC-20 for $100
Yeah, or
or
yeah. I was
less
just
if
about to
you look
say or
around.
less, but probably they're not too much less these days. But yeah,
Yeah,
$100. You keep your eyes
yeah,
open on Facebook Marketplace, or I don't know. Do you ever
yeah.
look at Craigslist anymore? I almost never go there anymore.
No,
But
I haven't looked at that in years. Yeah.
um, anyway, lastly, I know we discussed just before this about Brian Bagnall. So maybe and you did interview him before, or you've spoken to him, but maybe you
Yeah,
can address that.
yeah, Brian Bagnall. So I've had a show on Floppy Days about the VIC-20,
Hmm.
and he came on to do the history section of that. And of course, he's an author of Commodore history books, Company on the Edge, and Commodore Company on the Edge, and Commodore the Final Years. So yeah, Brian Bagnall I have spoken with before, and was actually getting ready to contact him again because I'm going to do a show on the Commodore 64 shortly on Floppy Days. So he as far as a historian goes, he's definitely
Hmm.
a good one to.
Well, he wrote three books. So the Commodore of the Final Years was his third in that series, and wow, what was the first one? I know I had it marked here because you can't find it anymore, other than over
I
a hundred
think there
dollars.
isn't there an Amiga Years book as
Yeah,
well.
but yeah, but his final one you can get it on Amazon for $33 essentially, hardcover, and it's there. A lot of good reviews. Um, but anyway, we try to keep these discussions short. What's our next chapter? Do you have that handy? I don't, so I have to
Yeah,
bring it over.
it's on the Atari
Oh,
story. So we move from Commodore to Jack Tramiel moving over to Atari. So that should be an interesting story.
and but his part of the story will be about, I guess you could say, halfway through its story, pretty much, right? Because Atari computers start around what, 78, maybe their story,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
he
yeah.
joins five
They
years
start
later or
much
so.
earlier. Yeah,
Okay, that'll be great.
that'll be fun.
So we'll see everybody back then, real
All right,
soon.
see you later.